Welcome back to Good Morning Baltimore.
Yay!
Yay! I'm Rhiannon.
And I'm John.
And we are back for one more look at musicals. Well, movies that are made into musicals. Today is High School Day. We are going to be
Don't worry, we're not doing High School Musical.
No, we're going to look at Heathers and Mean Girls. Which are shows that really they have a lot in common, and they were both made into musicals fairly recently. So here we go. The movie Mean Girls came out in 2004. The screenplay was by Tina Fey, and Tina Fey was in it, and a lot of the other people playing adults in the show were from the SNL crew. The story goes, Katie is going to high school for the first time after spending most of her life in Africa while her parents do research, and she discovers both some unpopular friends and some popular friends, and her unpopular friends convince her to stay friends with these popular friends so that she could sabotage them. And this sabotage attempt turns into a whole thing. Madness ensues.
Madness ensues, yes.
The musical opened in 2018. Tina Fey returned to write the book, and the music was written by Nell Benjamin of Legally Blonde fame, and Tina Fey's husband, Jeff Richmond, also did the music. He composed for The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, but he hasn't done any other musicals. Over a year later, it is still running on Broadway, and it's got a national tour in the works. However, last year it was nominated for 12 Tonys, and it didn't win any of them. I think The Band's Visit won all of them.
Yeah.
Heathers, a movie from 1988, directed by Michael Lehman, starring Winona Ryder as Veronica and Christian Slater as JD. Now this story, it sets up a very similar hierarchy when Veronica is taken under the wing of the three most powerful girls in her high school. All three of them are named Heather, and Veronica is made into a popular girl like them. But things take a turn for the crazy when Veronica's boyfriend, JD, mixes some drain cleaner into a hangover cure for Heather Chandler and kills her.
Blackness ensues.
Yes, it gets real dark real fast. They make the murder out to look like Heather Chandler kills herself, and then things just keep spiraling. More people die. It's messy. It's messy.
Especially the end.
So the musical, it opened off-Broadway in 2014. It ran for a few months off-Broadway. It never did go to Broadway, or at least it hasn't gone to Broadway yet. It did open on the West End in 2018, though. The music was written by Lawrence O'Keefe, that being the other half of the Legally Blonde team. And the music was also written by Kevin Murphy, whose other major musical credit is Reefer Madness.
Hey, Reefer Madness.
So, that's quite a team. But, yeah, of course, these shows have very similar elements, of course, being about high school, each having writers who wrote Legally Blonde. What they also have in common is the actress Barrett Wilbert-Weed.
Yay!
Barrett Wilbert-Weed, she plays Veronica in Heathers, and she also plays Janice, the unpopular friend in Mean Girls on Broadway. But yeah, the similarities of plot in these shows are almost uncanny. It's all the elements of what you need in a musical about high school. So let's start out. You need the song that introduces the hierarchy of high school. So in Mean Girls, that actually takes up two numbers. called Where Do You Belong? And Meet the Plastics, in which they walk into the cafeteria. Cafeteria scenes are key in both shows.
Yeah.
They walk into the cafeteria and they meet all of the cliques of the high school.
Where do you belong? Where do you belong? Where do you belong? Where do you belong? You'll be judged on sight and made to fit. So find a click and stick with it. Say, where do you belong? Let's take a walk around the cafeteria, shall we? I'll show you the world as I see it. Varsity jocks and JV jocks will throw you in a locker if you say hello. The rich stoners hate the gangsta whites, though they're all smoking the same oregano. Here's the sexually active band weeks. I got 2 words for you, embouchure and ooh. And if you like blowing and fingering, this is the group for you.
So then Heathers gets a similar song. It actually hits right at the beginning. Mean Girls needs to take a little time to explain that Katie is going to high school for the very first time, but Heathers dives right in and takes you to high school with the song Beautiful, where Veronica cynically looks around her high school and tries to figure out where everything went wrong.
September 1st, 1989. Dear Diary, I believe I'm a good person. You know, I think that there's good in everyone, but here we are, first day of senior year. And I look around at these kids that I've known all my life and I ask myself, what happened?
Freak, slut, burnout, bug-eyes, poser, lord-ass.
We were so tiny,
Language born
happy
in
and
the
shiny, playing tag and getting chased.
Freak, slut, loser, short bus.
Singing and clapping, laughing and napping, baking cookies, eating paste.
All night, stuck up, hunchback.
Then we got bigger, that was the trigger, like the Huns invading Rome. Oh, sorry. Welcome to my school, this ain't no high school, this is the Thunderdome. Hold your breath and count the days, we're graduating soon.
White trash.
College will be paradise if I'm not dead by June. But I know, life can be beautiful. I pray for a better way. If we changed back then, we could change again. We can be beautiful.
Ow!
Just not today.
So, the next important step in a show about high school, meeting the boy. So, in Mean Girls, we get this cute little song called Stupid with Love, where on first sight, Katie sees this boy in her math class and goes, wow, maybe I won't be alone forever after all.
So thank you, math, for being there to bring me joy. And thank you, math, 'cause now you brought me this cute boy.
Is it 2?
Yes! He's like someone from TV. He's like that guy who gives out roses to those women. His clothes he's grooming, and he's a foot away from me with swoopy hair and shiny eyes that I could swim in. He's lying in the room, and I'm stupid with love. I wanna get it, but how? Smart for the math, but stupid with love. I wanna get it, I didn't get it till now. 2 over 0 is undefined.
Jinx.
And then, of course, Heathers being a ton darker, you get a song called Fight For Me in Heathers. Of course, in the movie, what happens is JD pulls a gun on people, which they decide not to do in the musical. Instead, JD gets into a good old-fashioned fist fight, and Veronica's really impressed that JD would take on some jocks in a fist fight.
Yeah.
Let them drive us underground. I don't care how far. You can set my broken bones, and they know
other key elements to a high school show, the party at someone's house. They happen in very different spots in each musical. In Heathers, Big Fun actually happens pretty early on because it's kind of the first main event that Veronica is going to this party with Heather Chandler.
Dad says act our age, you heard the man, it's time to rave. Blast the bass, turn out the lights, ain't nobody home tonight. Drink, smoke, it's all cool, let's get naked in my pool. Punch the wall and start a fight, ain't nobody home tonight. His folks got a waterbed, come upstairs and rest your head. Let's rub each other's backs while watching porn on Cinemax. The folks are gone, it's time for big fun. We're up till dawn, having some big fun. When Mom and Dad forget to lock the liquor cabinet, it's big fun, big fun, big fun. Woo!
And then, of course, Big Fun, as a song title, is a reference to the original movie of Heathers, because there's a band that everyone's really into that wrote Teenage Suicide, Don't Do It, and the band is called Big Fun. In Mean Girls, the party happens very late in the movie. It's kind of Katie's big final move to claim Erin as her own. She lies to her parents and throws this party at her house while they're away, and stuff goes nuts fast, as high school parties in movies do.
Whose house is this? It's my house now. Whose house is this? It's my house now. Whose house is this? It's my house now.
Seriously, whose house is this? Hear about a party? Here's the procedure. Text all your friends, tell them where to meet you, so you know nobody. That's not what counts. It's somebody's house and they got no bouncer. Lots of marijuana and money in the content. Drinking from the neck of the bottle. What the heck? We lit up like a sport. Smoking on your porch. Trying to maintain while the neighbors complain.
And finally, very interestingly, both of these shows, they're placed in very similar spots of this kind of a wake-up call number. In Mean Girls, it's actually Erin kind of giving a wake-up call to Katie of kind of, where has this gone as you've tried to overthrow the plastics, you've become like a plastic yourself.
I am more and I am better. And no one likes you more, not anyone, not her. More is always better. Don't look at me that way. What girl would you prefer?
I would prefer the girl you were, not who you're trying to be. You think this works with me? Well, you thought wrong. Looking at this place, I see you trying to erase what is best about yourself just to belong. You say more is always better, but there is less of you than there was before. So if more is always better, then you should have thought it through a bit more.
I should have thought it through a bit. You know what I had more of? Stars.
What a clever turn of phrase.
Yes.
And then in Heathers, it's actually Veronica's wake up to JD of, hey, maybe we shouldn't kill people.
Fine. We're damaged, really damaged, but that does not make us wise. We're not special. We're not different. We don't choose who lives or dies. Let's be normal. See bad movies. Sneak a beer and watch TV. We'll bake brownies or go bowling. Don't you want a life with me? Can't we be 17? That's all I want to do.
what's interesting is this moment isn't really one that's in the movie. In the movie, Veronica very quickly realizes that there is no changing JD and immediately tries breaking up with him. So the musical adds in this moment where she really wants to keep JD but can't go on killing people and wants to try and talk him out of continuing to do this. But then, so both of these wake-up call songs actually come back as reprises in the finale. So that motif about stars from More is Better comes back in the finale in the song I See Stars, about how she sees all of the people in her high school as stars, no matter how popular they are, no matter how they look. And then 17 becomes a reprise that Veronica sings with Martha Dunstock at the end as they decide to go be teenagers together, just like she wanted to do but couldn't do with JD. But yes, all these very similar strokes. Of course, tonally, these are such different movies, and those tones are really preserved for the musicals. But very similar strokes about approaches to the high school hierarchy and popularity and discovery on the part of the protagonist, in spite of being very different shows. Very similar plot strokes. So, in one of our ongoing themes about adapting movies into musicals, the idea of choosing time period. Each of the shows that we're looking at today kind of go different routes with that. So, Heathers stays set in the 80s, and for many reasons needs to stay set in the 80s.
Yeah.
But they, like we said with Little Shop becoming even more 60s, they make Heathers so very much more 80s.
Yes, there are a lot of pop culture references that you have to be versed in the 80s.
Yeah, Dad got all of them. I got most of them. And then Mean Girls goes the route of updating the show, which really becomes like we looked at with other shows that become updated to present day. They mention like tweeting and unsubscribing and having likes and followers, and that seems to be it in terms of updating, which for me, I have a lot of questions about how you do that in Mean Girls, because a lot, I think, changes about social dynamics if you choose to set the show in 2018 instead of 2004. Like, are they still calling each other on the phone? Because that's not realistic.
That's so first decade.
Other things that are a little different about the shows, each show kind of comes with different sets of expectations. A musical like Mean Girls the Musical comes with so many expectations because people run around quoting Mean Girls all the time. Dad and I actually both watched Mean Girls for the first time for the purpose of this podcast, and there were lines that I've been saying that I didn't even know were from Mean Girls. But yeah, so Mean Girls the Musical comes with so many big expectations, and my understanding is that they deliver on those expectations.
Yep.
All the iconic lines are in it.
And I think, honestly, for better or for worse, Mean Girls has Tina Fey. You know, basically as a writer, kind of herself a pop culture icon.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think that kind of gives the film and the musical some different kind of staying power.
Heathers, I don't really have a sense of the expectation. I'd never really heard of the movie Heathers until I was in high school when the musical came out, and people were all talking about the movie and the musical, so it must have been in the popular culture consciousness, but maybe not as big as Mean Girls.
Yeah, I mean, it was during the period when Winona Ryder was kind of the it thing, but it wasn't a film that really did particularly well. It's not that I'm the hippest guy in the world, I freely admit, but it's not one that I was really on my radar in the late 80s when it came out, so, but it has gained a certain popularity.
Cult classic.
Yeah.
But even the musical itself has kind of reached much more cult classic status. Like we said, it really only ran off-Broadway and did run on the West End, but it's much more for like cult classic consumption as opposed to like public, like mass consumption, like Mean Girls on Broadway seems to be. Like Mean Girls actually, at least from what you can hear in the cast recording, seems to tone back on a lot of language.
Yeah.
Whereas Heathers holds back in no way, which I think is something that comes with being for off-Broadway or for Broadway.
Right.
So the protagonists of both musicals kind of are given more power in their respective adaptations. Veronica makes a lot of her own choices, like the biggest one that we kind of noticed is the song Dead Girl Walking, which is about Veronica's decision to go get together with JD. In the movie, it's actually JD who shows up at her house, and they go hang out. But the music,
yeah, it's this kind of conspiratorial game of croquet in the backyard, which turns into a game of strip croquet. So it's it's very innocent, innocent teenage, wacky fun. Whereas in the musical, you can see her desperation. She believes she is indeed going to be no one, erased from the high school, and she is absolutely desperate, and she's the one that breaks into JD's house and basically says, "I want sex."
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very different Veronica. The song is just so well written, so well sung, so well played out.
Barrett Wilbert Weed.
Barrett Wilbert Weed.
Because then Katie in Mean Girls also gets kind of more power of her own. In Mean Girls the movie, especially early on in Katie's overthrow plan, she kind of sets things in motion and then steps back to just watch it all fall apart, especially in terms of like Gretchen and Karen turning on Regina. So like in the movie, it's Gretchen who decides that Regina can't sit with them anymore for wearing sweatpants on the wrong day. But in the musical, Katie stays involved in this overthrow process and really heads it a lot more publicly. And she's the one who tells Regina that she can't sit with them. The biggest change in Heathers the Musical is they do a lot of changes to the character of JD. Movie JD is a straight up psychopath. He really doesn't seem to express emotions except amusement at morbid things. But JD in the musical is given a lot more emotional base. Songs like Freeze Your Brain kind of talk about trying to like numb down his intense emotions about the loss of his mom and about like resentment at his dad for moving him around so much. And then as we go along, JD actually discusses that a lot of his murders are kind of motivated by Veronica, as opposed to JD the movie psychopath, who likes killing people and enjoys taking Veronica along for the ride. Especially you see this difference in JD when Veronica fakes her own suicide near the end of the show, and in the movie, JD climbs in through her window and starts laughing because he's a psychopath.
Yes, he said I was going to come kill you anyway. So, yeah.
And
in the musical, JD has some actual emotion.
Yes, of this, and kind of makes this declaration that he is going to blow up Westerberg High without her. Is this kind of noble final mission. in her memory.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Which the film, it's trying, I think, in some ways, you hear JD make comments about, the school is society, and, trying to make some kind of social commentary. But for me, the film itself falls maybe a little flat because JD doesn't seem to, it's not fleshed out his motivation being a socially conscious one. Not that would make it right, but, it's not a socially conscious. He just seems to, enjoy murder. He's kind of a Sweeney Todd kind of character. You kind of get the feeling he's almost like Veronica's stalker. It's like he blows himself up, not so much, even though he says it's about society and stuff like that, it's for Veronica, which is creepy. Because here he is, he's singing, we could be 17 too, but he's still thinking in the back of his mind,
Yeah, he's just saying that.
He's just saying that.
But Veronica really wants to be
being 17 is being obsessed with a girl.
And exacting justice.
Yeah, exacting justice. And
oh well, Veronica tried. In the musical, she tried.
17 very differently.
And then, I'm gonna shout out my friend Amelia for pointing this out a very long time ago, but the character of Betty Finn in the movie actually is not in Heathers the Musical. What they actually do is they kind of combine both the characters of Betty Finn and Martha into Martha Dunstock. So instead of having a separate, like, this person used to be my best friend who is Betty and the perpetually uncool person who is Martha, they are combined into one. So Martha was very good friends with Veronica and is also the very uncool one that everyone makes fun of. And yeah, I think that choice works. Condensing characters, we talked about that being a thing in shows like Hairspray and Little Shop, and it's a choice that works.
Yeah. The IMDb trivia mentions the fact that in the film, Martha has one line.
I noticed that.
And that's at the very, very end.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like, you understand what they're trying to do through the film, but it seems like having Betty, who's kind of a friend, doesn't have that much screen time either. And Martha, it seems, who doesn't really have that much screen time and only one line. There was a deer. We just saw a deer off the side of the road. But back to Martha and Betty. So combining them makes sense in terms of giving, and now you're able to really flesh out this character who is both an outcast and Veronica's friend, and gets her own song, and is a better character.
But yeah, now that you say that, of like Martha only has one line, that brings me back to the point that we were making in Groundhog Day, of movies seem to be able to do so much with silence, which is something that they can do. Like Martha in the movie, right before she steps in front of a moving vehicle, it's this whole scene with her alone in the gym, and she like spills a soda on herself, and it's this really like quiet, subtle scene that kind of shows her breaking point, which I think is a really cool scene in the movie, and it's just not something that translates well onto the stage, I guess.
Right.
You need to
you
give
have to
more
open your mouth
verbalization
and sing, yeah.
to a musical. Although speaking of practicalities for musicals, we were discussing something we haven't discussed yet in this podcast, is that there are some things that just don't work on stage that you have to change when you go from a movie to a musical. So in Heathers, there's the whole scene where Kurt and Ram take Heather, Duke, and Veronica out on a double date, and then they go out cow tipping. And then, of course, this precipitates the whole thing where Kurt and Ram make up all these rumors about what Veronica did on this date and motivates JD to kill them. but cow tipping you just can't really do on stage. You
Those
know,
cows are such divas when you put them on stage.
I mean, there have been cows on stage. I mean, there's Into the Woods, which has had numbers of humorous portrayals of Milky White, and of course, then that kind of makes the scene about the cows and not so much about what's
That's
going
right.
on. So if you want to focus on the dynamic between Kurt and Ram and the Heathers and Veronica, what they do for the musical is they set it at another party. So you can hone in on Kurt and Ram unsuccessfully trying to win Veronica.
Win. That's an interesting choice of words.
Well, something else that we noticed with both shows, like many of the musicals we've looked at, it really takes themes that are kind of there in the movie and emphasizes them a lot more into a more stateable message.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think and they both do well with it. We talked about Mean Girls didn't impress us at first, but it started to grow on us by the end. We were really into the song I'd Rather Be Me, which is sung by Barrett Wilbert Weed.
Barrett Wilbert Weed.
Well, first of all, it makes the character Janice a lot kinder. I don't know if kinder is the word.
More honest.
More honest.
More, more real. In the movie, I was telling Rhiannon, it's interesting because when you hear that song, it actually, then go back to the movie, it actually puts that into a better context, I think. In the movie, everyone is making their confessions, and Janice basically, her confession in the movie is, I did all this, and I'm not sorry.
Yeah, that made me a lot less sympathetic of Janice in general, like, for the movie, that, like, Janice seemed like just as much a part of the problem as any other girl in the high school. But I'd Rather Be Me really highlighted more positive traits of Janice.
It's like the reason I did this, or let's not pretend here. Let's be honest with each other. And sometimes we're going to fight, and sometimes we're going to hate each other, but it doesn't have to be the end. So let's just be honest with each other and not dance around this and not give these, even give these, like, fake I'm sorries and think that everything's going to be okay. So it's a different take on Janice, and I like it.
Yeah.
I thought the second act of Mean Girls, it got stronger as it went along. So.
But yeah, that kind of highlights the importance that they have in the movie, the importance of, like, honesty and friendship and those kinds of things that you get in the movie, but you kind of get to say outright in the musical. Heathers actually takes a little more time to run with a theme that's really hardly spoken outright in the movie. The song 17 to me kind of boils down to, like, what the show is about for me, of this idea that Veronica is like, let's step back, we're teenagers and we're trying to, like, exact justice on the universe, and, like, what the heck, we're just teenagers. Of this kind of idea of let's just be teenagers and not worry about the bigger issues of society.
Being the asteroid that kills the dinosaurs, which is, I believe, a phrase.
In both,
yeah.
the movie and the musical. Listening to Heathers the musical and then going back and watching Heathers again helped me appreciate themes in the movie more that I hadn't noticed before. That's something I haven't really gotten from anything else that we've watched. Like, watching Beetlejuice, the movie, after listening to the musical, they put themes there that weren't necessarily there, and they definitely worked, but, like, they weren't there before. Groundhog Day tried to emphasize themes that were already perfectly well put in the movie. But yeah, Heathers actually made me go back and like see more in the movie in a different way, but in a good way. Yeah.
I think for me, Heathers is kind of a revelation. There's a strength to it. It's not just. There's a difference, I think, between clever, which I think Mean Girls tries to be. It tries to be clever, and being kind of really insightful. And I think Heathers, for me, song for song, just is the more insightful and more honest kind of score and lyric. So I like Heathers.
Yeah.
A lot.
Well, thank you for listening to Good Morning Baltimore. My internship is all over, so Dad and I will not be riding in a car on a regular basis for the time being. We can call this a hiatus for the show. Maybe we'll come back.
Woohoo! I think we've talked about all the musicals that there are.
Yes. We've definitely, I think we've pretty well covered the categories of movie into musical adaptations. So maybe if we come back, we'll look at something else.
We'll look at something else.
Yeah.
We'll look at our favorite musicals.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you to our loyal listeners and our loyal 3 subscribers. We love
Make
you,
it
3
4.
subscribers.
Somebody out there, make it 4.
Woo!
Thank
Comment
you.
if you have any thoughts about Mean Girls and Heathers, or if you've seen these shows, because these are shows that we haven't seen.
That would be so fetch.
So, very. Thank you for listening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.